Erev Tov Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Seems like that President Trump's patience with maybe with some of the leadership in Israel is coming, wearing thin, you might say. This is something I'm noticing from several things recently, and more specifically because of the latest comment that he made about Iran. Now, he doesn't say Iran specifically, but that's what he's implying. They can do what they want in Syria, and it's mainly because his patience, his time, his resolve with dealing with Syria is pretty much over. And talking about the pulling out of troops, he's changing his opinion from a month to possibly 4 months. But then again, he says, don't put words in his mouth. He said, you say it, but I didn't say it. A lot of things are being stated back and forth. And in the Israeli press, they're really pushing this issue about Trump. Iran can do what it wants in Syria, trying to really put the pressure on him to get that evangelical base out there to let him know, you either tighten the ship up or you're going to be thrown out of office. Well, I'm just kind of sitting back for a little bit here and watching the situation. As I stated before, the Kurds, naturally, if the U.S. just abruptly pulls out, will leave a vacuum. Israel wouldn't like it. Iran could fill it. I think really it should be the Syrian government that fills the vacuum when they pull out. At the same time, the Turks are mounting up there, preparing their own offensive in the nation as soon as Trump pulls out. And we're going to come back to this in just a moment. I'm on Arutz Shiva's website right now, Israel National News. Let's first take a look at this right here. This is where he begins to speak about this today, and this is only just a brief clip here.
The Kurds, it's very interesting. Turkey doesn't like them, other people do. I didn't like the fact that they're selling the small oil that they have to Iran, and we asked them not to sell it to Iran. But the Kurds, our partners, are selling oil to Iran. We're not thrilled about that, okay? I'm not happy about it at all. At the same time, they fight better when we fight with them. You know, when we send 30 F-18s in front of them, they fight much better than they do when we don't. And you've seen what's happened. But we want to protect the Kurds, nevertheless. We want to protect the Kurds. But I don't want to be in Syria forever. It's sand. And it's
sand and death, as he kept saying in this video right here. And so it's, he is talking about trying to keep his campaign promise about bringing our troops back home. But at the same time, I'm a bit concerned that it might be opening the door for Israel to launch a strike against Iran, drag the U.S. into a war that maybe Trump, and I want to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt here, he might not want to get involved in that war. Now, I retweeted this earlier today. Now, this was President Trump back when he signed the agreement for Israel of $38 billion. And I tell you, talk about a video worth 1,000 words. Just watch what happens here. I mean, there's been several things that have crept up here in the last few weeks that has really been making me wonder what's going on. Watch what the president does here. Netanyahu tries to grab him, reaches out to shake his hand. Trump is definitely not happy about something. He comes back, shakes his hand, but he still doesn't seem to be thrilled. What's going on? What's going on? Cannot help but wonder. They say it's a victory for Russia and Iran that the U.S. that Trump's going to pull out of Syria. To me, it's a victory for the Syrian people. And maybe it's not going over well with some of the leadership of Israel. Maybe for the Saudis, it's really going south, and also for the Turks and the Kuwaitis, who all have not Kuwaitis, but the Qatar, who have all invested millions of dollars to overthrow this nation, to follow that plan that Barry Chamish and Joe Boehnerman had shared with us some time back. So, we look over here, and it says here in the article by Arutz Sheva, U.S. President Donald Trump stated on Wednesday that Iran can do what they want in Syria. Trump made the remarks during a press briefing at the White House in which he discussed the controversial withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. Trump justified the withdrawal by stating, "We're talking about sand and death in Syria. We're not talking about vast wealth." He also blamed his predecessor, Barack Obama, having lost Syria long ago. Right? They go on. Israeli officials worry that the U.S. withdrawal could leave Iran unchecked in its ambitions to achieve a land bridge between the Mediterranean and make it easier for Iran to smuggle weapons to Hezbollah terrorist organization. Interesting, right? Listen, I can concur Israel's concern when it comes to Iran and the connection with Hezbollah. But I also see, too, what has been happening for a long time inside of Syria. And as much as I'm not crazy about Hezbollah, Hezbollah has joined the fight to try to stop all these jihadists that run around beheading the Christians and killing the Yazdis and working with ISIS and all the other evils that have been happening in that nation. So there's a lot that could be said there, too. Just keep that in mind. But then again, yes, Hezbollah is a terrorist threat for Israel. They've been building tunnels into the nation, which our leaders in Israel lied to the public about. Even though it was brought to their attention, I find it highly suspect that the Israeli leaders have waited all this time to bring this finally to a public scrutiny now, only to be able to blame it on Iran. It's just a bit of a suspect situation. Nonetheless, what's going on with Trump? Don't know. But now they got a whole new issue that is brewing. Hackers threaten to leak 9/11 files that will top Snowden's finest work. This is coming out all over the United States. We were looking at this when it first came out this morning. And I have to admit, this is quite interesting. And you cannot help but wonder, are there those that are willing to try to leak secret documents to put the U.S. under a spotlight in their role with the Twin Towers? Well, nonetheless, it definitely would put Israel's role involved in the Twin Towers under scrutiny. So they both would have a very serious issue to have to face. Now, they've already closed the Twitter account down of the guy that first released this. And, he's demanding a ransom paid in Bitcoins in order to keep from releasing it. Well, it's not going to happen. It's called the Dark Overlord, the international hacker group, have announced that they have stolen a trove of undisclosed information regarding 9/11 attacks. And they are ready to release it unless they do not receive ransom money denominated in Bitcoins. Well, I guess we're going to see it then. Because, there ain't nobody going to pay their ransom fees. So, I'm very curious to see what's going to be released. And I've read some of the documents already. There are documents that you can obtain by going to their website link. Actually, their Twitter page. Because they closed the Twitter page account, but they actually had photographs of documents that were on there. We looked at those. We actually have already looked at those. So they do have some definitely some damning type of evidence. And I can only imagine what they must have, even greater than that. So just have to watch, see how that plays out, right? All right, Ukraine. Big issues going on in Ukraine right now. Michael D has released this particular video here on his Twitter page. And this is showing a military movement of small boats. Military boats, quite a number of those around the Odessa area. And I was watching the video, and it just seems to be an endless supply of those, as well as pontoons. Those right there on your screen, those are portable pontoons. So what are these boats going to be used for? I mean, it's some type of military application, but what are they going to be used for? I'm not really sure. I would assume they're going to be some type of a speedboat. But for what application, can't really say. But you know, it's kind of interesting because all this comes on the heel of the U.S. May impose new sanctions on Russia and arm Ukraine after Kerch, ex-ambassador Herbst is saying. So the U.S. military assistance to Ukraine may include Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Well, I don't like they're going to necessarily get Harpoon ship missiles, at least not at this particular stage of the game, but maybe these little small vessels was something in exchange as a beginning down payment. I don't know. But former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Director of Atlantic Council, Eurasia Center John Herbst says the United States may soon impose new sanctions on Russia and arm Ukraine in response to Russia's aggression in the Kerch Strait. It's funny how we only get one side of that story, isn't it? One side, and so therefore Russia's the big aggressor. Another major suspect type of story, right? Anyway, Ukraine suffers their first war death of the year. Two more soldiers were wounded, and as well in Kiev Post they posted this here, and these guys are down by Mariupol, and Mariupol, of course, is right down here on the close to Russia. Right there is where those soldiers were wounded at, and of course the one that was killed. Now, another interesting thing, and I did ask Mikael about this because he's always so kind enough to respond to us about things that are going on over there. I'd noticed he had done a series of tweets here about a Russian soldier that had gone missing. A Ukrainian soldier that had gone missing, and presumably he has maybe even been captured by the Russian forces. Now, but the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade, which he says here, which is deployed in the city of Mukachevo, which is actually, if you were to look on the map, I'll show you where that's at. That's to the far west of Ukraine, way down here in this little area that I have kind of like in the reddish area there. That's that area there to the far western side of the country. Now, I asked Mikael because I was trying to understand, is it that he was saying that this brigade is stationed there, but they are in Mariupol, or they're not even deployed outside of that area? Because he does state in there that one of their guys may have been captured by the Russians, and of course, in my point would be, then how are the Russians getting him on the other side of Ukraine? So it may stand to reason that yes, they are deployed in the Mariupol area. And of course, this is what the Basarin, the spokesperson, the military spokesperson for the Donetsk region, was saying already, that the 128th Brigade was a mechanized military unit that was stationed in the Mariupol area, and that would actually be the beginning of the aggressions against the Donetsk and Luhansk regions there. So again, not really sure what's going on there. We're just kind of keeping an eye on how these things develop there. Then I come across this article here I wanted to share with you real quick. This is written by Michael Colborn. And he says, why does no one care that neo-Nazis are gaining power in Ukraine? And this was a very interesting article because he talks in here. He says, I can't count the number of times I've been told Ukraine doesn't really have a problem with its far right. It's all Kremlin propaganda. You personally are helping Putin by talking about it. Other countries have a far-right problems too, so why single out Ukraine? I've heard it all, he writes in his article. But I expected to hear even more lines like this in the new year, all because I'm going to point out the obvious. Ukraine really does have a far-right problem. And it's not a fiction of the Kremlin propaganda, and it's well past time to talk about it. Well, come to find out in the story here that Michael was actually there in Ukraine as part of a protest group of 50 people, and then about 200 neo-Nazis come over there, shut down their group without authorization to do so, but they shut it down. Michael ends up getting smacked around by some of these neo-Nazi thugs, as well as having punched right in his face, breaks his glasses in front of the policeman, and the policemen do nothing whatsoever about it. Sounds like to me that the CIA-backed neo-Nazis were doing a pretty doggone good job, because they have certainly taken over the entire nation, and their ranks are growing, according to the article that Colburn writes here. He also brings up several cases, including this picture here with Petro Poroshenko, where the guy that's circled in green right here is wearing that the emblem on his vest there of the neo-Nazis. He brings out several other things to bring out these points here, how it is a growing issue in Ukraine, the far-right neo-Nazis. And of course, there's even been articles in the Israeli news media as well about Israel arming neo-Nazis. We're seeing neo-Nazis with Israeli-made weapons in their hands. And yet, Israel is supposed to be a country that would be against any type of fascist, Nazism, movement, supremacist, white supremacist types of groups here. But yet, we are finding out that, well, when it comes to money, I guess some people just don't really care. Sad day, sad day. Listen, there is something, though, that I have been looking at recently, guys, and I am speaking, of course, in Michigan, not Michigan, but in Portland, Oregon, and I think it'll probably be one of the last times I speak publicly about the time I spent in the CIA. The 7 years I spent there, but this story came out. The article I'm looking at right here on the Telegraph is an old article, but it's a movie that was made about Gary Webb, and it's called "Killing the Messenger." And I couldn't encourage you enough to watch. If you have the time, I forget where it's at. I think it's on Amazon. You could rent it there, or whatever. Killing the Messenger, about the life of Gary Webb. He is a journalist that allegedly committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the head. I don't know how in the world anyone could ever kill themselves, shooting themselves twice in the head and commit suicide. But anyway, in 1996, he broke the story, and he did, as a journalist, better than any journalist I'd ever seen, uncovering the very cases that I knew about myself, from the drugs that were being smuggled, the Contras that were being armed. He went there and he did an amazing story on his paper, published it, but he was part of a small paper, and so therefore he gained notoriety and fame almost immediately from the published articles that he did on this. But then just as quickly, mainstream media, everyone went against this guy and just crushed his character. And even after this movie came out that really exonerated his work and what he did, I was appalled to see that there were some articles that were going on even after that still questioned his true journalistic work that he did. And they said that he had no credible sources to back him up. No one would go on record. You know, I really wish he were alive today. I'd go on record for him. And so that's part of what my story is as well, which corroborates the information he says. Now he says, and he doesn't say it in his work, that the CIA created the cocaine epidemic in America, but it certainly was a contributing factor. And there is a part of his story that he was missing, that he did not know about. Or at least if he knew about it, he did not write about it that I have found thus far, and that was the politicians that were involved. There were a huge number of politicians that were involved with this whole organization of smuggling drugs, weapons, you name it. CIA, of course, naturally, that's your boots on the ground to make sure the operation runs smoothly, and of course also to silence any dissenters that would cause waves that would slow the flow of cash down, that not only buys the weapons to supply all of the jihadists around the world that we're funding. Even to this date, it does that, but it also works very much in favor of padding the pockets of those that wanted to become wealthy. You know, I spoke to a senator earlier today. Won't speak about his name right now, but we briefly had spoken a little bit about some issues that we both have a passion about. And as I spoke with him, one thing that I found very interesting was that when he was running for governor, he told me the funds just were not there. Well, I didn't get a chance to say this to him, but the reason why the funds were not there is because you got to be on board, and I'm sure he knows this already as well. You got to be on board with what the protocol is in politics today. And at least back in the 80s and 90s, if you were working the well-oiled machine that financed our military campaigns around the world, which are still going on, mind you, to this very day, and you were part and a willing collaborator with all the funds that needed to be made from the selling of illegal drugs and the trafficking of drugs, etc., then yeah, your campaign will be well financed, whether it be by the wealthy organizations that are making the millions of dollars, not because they're making so much profits off of the things that they're producing, but because they also know how to launder money very well. Not so discreetly, though. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun with Israeli News Live. Sure you might want to be in Portland. January 18th, 19th, and 20th. And L.A. Marzulli, myself, my wife will be speaking on 5G. And I think she's going to take it to another level that you've just not seen before. I will also be going into the Nephilim. Since L.A. Marzulli is already speaking on like-manner topics, I'm going to take you from a biblical side in a way that not many people are aware of. Share that with you as well. And as well as the corruption, what's going on in this government, and where they're planning on taking us. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun with Israeli News Live, soldiersofthelion.com. Check out the description below. Our website is there. Also, don't forget, support the broadcast. We do need your help, and you can see our address right here at the bottom of your screen here. If you want to send it by mail, we greatly appreciate your time and your help in keeping this on the air. Erev Tov, in a world of angels.